Good afternoon, dear friends. You are on the Ruslan Belov channel. Let's get straight to the situation on the front. Before we begin, I would like to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. Now, let's move on to the Sumy region. Today, a lot of interesting and important information is coming from there. We'll start with the fact that for 2 days now, various experts, both pro-Russian and neutral, have been reporting that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have crossed the state border in another location. At the moment, battles are underway for the settlement of Vladimirovka. So far, no geolocations have been published that could confirm this information, but such reports are already coming in. In general, sources report that in recent days, the Russian side has been heavily shelling the Sumy region. It is reported that over the past few days, around 100 airstrikes using FAB 500, FAB 1500, and FAB 3000 bombs have been recorded. All of this suggests that the Russian side may have decided to create a buffer zone. The only question is whether this buffer zone includes the settlement of Sumy. As for the situation on the ground, over the past day, we have 2 updates on this section of the front. The first update is that the armed forces of Ukraine have control over the settlement of Guva. Let me remind you that during the Zaporizhzhia counter-offensive, as part of the special operation, some cartographers and pro-Russian experts marked the settlement of Guva as being in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, as if Ukrainian formations had been completely pushed out during the offensive. However, yesterday, footage of objective control was published, showing FPV drone strikes on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in this village. It is important to understand clearly that at the moment, Ukrainian units are present in Guva, but they do not have full control over the village. The problem is that Guva is completely cut off from supplies from the mainland, and no supplies are coming in at all. If any are coming, it is possibly only with the use of drones. Already, a serious scandal is spreading in Ukrainian networks and channels, according to which the units in Guva no longer even have the ability to receive ammunition. Just food, simple food. Today, relatives are raising the alarm, demanding that the Ukrainian military leadership send food for the soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine. This indicates that the settlement of Guva is under heavy fire control, and all supply routes are already under the control of FPV drones. It is possible that in the next few days, or perhaps nights, Ukrainian units will begin to make their first attempts to retreat towards the settlement of Gornyol or further in a western direction. This should happen soon. Also today, some neutral cartographers have noted additional markings of a small forest area located along the state border between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. We see that this large forest area has been completely cleared by the Russian army, and it is possible that in the near future, Russian units will begin assault operations further in a western direction with the aim of getting closer to the settlement of Sadki first, and then possibly moving towards the settlement of Yunakivka. In general, more and more video materials and footage are coming in, showing the losses suffered by the armed forces of Ukraine in the Sumy district of the Kursk region. Of course, estimates of losses vary from source to source, but everyone agrees that during the time the armed forces of Ukraine were in the Sumy district, they lost more than 1,000 units of equipment. These losses were truly catastrophic and critical for Ukraine, and most importantly, very difficult to replenish. Some experts say that the ratio of equipment losses between Ukraine and the Russian Federation is 1-to-1. But the problem is that for the Russian Federation, losses in equipment are easily replenished. Here, industry works in 3 shifts, 4 shifts, around the clock. While for the Ukrainian side, when it comes to supply, there are always some questions, some problems. Whether it's from one Western state or another, there are, of course, funding issues. Information is also coming in that it will be extremely difficult for the armed forces of Ukraine to replenish all the losses they have suffered during the fighting in the Sumy direction, and even if they can recover, it will happen very slowly. Next, we move with you to the Belgorod region, where fighting continues along the border. Let me remind you that a few days ago, the Ukrainian side attempted to cross the border, and again, this crossing is an attempt to, let's say, improve their negotiating positions ahead of the meeting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. These attempts are simply aimed at improving their negotiating positions and possibly forcing the Russian Federation to make certain compromises regarding the fighting along the line of contact. Of course, it would be most advantageous for the Ukrainian side if a situation arose where hostilities ceased, at least in certain sections of the front. After all, before a full-fledged truce begins, the Ukrainian side may insist, for example, on a moratorium on hostilities along the border between the Bryansk, Chernihiv, and Sumy regions, as well as between the Kursk and Sumy regions. That is, to minimize the front line, so to speak, to the area of only Donetsk and Pokrovsk, which in turn would allow the armed forces of Ukraine to defend more, let's say, flexibly and densely. However, of course, at the moment, this situation is not of interest to the Russian Federation, as information continues to come in from the Sudzha district regarding war crimes. Drones are still being launched from the north of the Chernihiv and Sumy regions towards Moscow, so for the Russian Federation, the topic of negotiations to stop hostilities along the line of contact is not currently relevant. Next, we move with you to the Kharkiv region. Yesterday, Zelensky arrived in Kharkiv, where he met with the entire military leadership. The Minister of Defense, the Chief of the General Staff, and all the commanders were present, as well as Andriy Yermak, Syrsky, and Umarov. While the details of the conversation are not disclosed, the discussion generally revolved around the situation on the line of contact. Some experts say that Zelensky's goal in Kharkiv was to discuss with the command the possibility of the Ukrainian side admitting defeat in this conflict, and in the event that the Ukrainian side has to sign a peace agreement or a capitulation agreement, leaving the line of contact and abandoning regions such as Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia, how the command would react and whether the Ukrainian army is ready for such a development. Perhaps these are just rumors, but at least such a situation is already being discussed in certain circles. Next, we received information from the settlement of Vovchansk. We haven't received anything from this section of the front for quite some time. And today, the first geolocation has surfaced. In these frames, we can see 2 Russian assault aircraft conducting a clearing operation in the eastern part of this small town, which has essentially been wiped off the face of the earth since the fighting began in the summer of 2024. These frames come from a small building where Russian soldiers are clearing Ukrainian armed forces positions. Based on these frames, there has been a slight adjustment to the map. Next, we move with you to the North Kupiansk direction, where heavy fighting continues between the Russian and Ukrainian armies. If we talk about the Russian side, over the past day, according to various geolocations and objective control footage, we have adjusted the map in favor of the Russian armed forces, and in these frames we can see Ukrainian drones striking positions, specifically a dugout of the Russian armed forces in this area. Based on these frames, there has been a slight adjustment to the map. In general, we can see that if we look at the Oskil River, starting from the state border and ending at the settlement of Kupiansk, we can already see that absolutely the entire bank of the river, let's say the former Ukrainian bank on this section of the front, is under the control of the Russian armed forces. Not a single patch of the Oskil River north of Kupiansk up to the state border remains under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. The entire river on this section of the front is now under the control of the Russian army, meaning it is no longer possible to expand the bridgehead along the river. Now the bridgehead must be expanded deeper into Ukrainian territory in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. Also, footage has come in from here of FPV drone strikes on nearby settlements, and it is likely that the Russian Federation will move in the direction of these settlements in the near future. Again, if we sum up everything, summarize all the news regarding Zelensky's visit to Kharkiv, the slight advance in the settlement of Vovchansk, as well as the expansion of the Russian army's presence on the Ukrainian side of the Oskil River, everything suggests that an offensive may be expected soon between Vovchansk, Kupiansk, and the Pechenihi Reservoir. That is, this section of the front may be cut off from Ukrainian armed forces units. At the same time, the Ukrainian side is regularly conducting counterattacks northeast of the settlement of Kupiansk. Some cartographers note that over the past day, Ukrainian units have managed to advance close to Sinkivka, as well as to the settlement of Zakidne. Next, we move with you to the Donetsk sector of the front. Over the past day, there has been a slight adjustment in the northern part of the settlement. Ukrainian sources have published a very important video. In these frames, we can see FPV drone strikes carried out by the 42nd Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the northern part of the settlement of Donetsk. Based on these frames, there has been a slight adjustment to the map. In general, there is nothing remarkable in this video, just ordinary military routine. But the only notable point is how these strikes were carried out. Let me remind you once again, the 42nd Mechanized Brigade, which was previously entirely on the Zaporizhzhia direction. This indicates that Ukrainian units have redeployed the 42nd Brigade from the north of Ukraine to the Donetsk area in order to stabilize the front line. So we can see that both the Russian and Ukrainian sides are completing their regrouping. The Zaporizhzhia battle has come to an end, and now all units, both Russian and Ukrainian, are gradually being redeployed to separate sectors of the front, such as Donetsk, Chasiv Yar, and Pokrovsk. In connection with this, it is possible to expect an intensification of hostilities in the usual directions, such as Pokrovsk, South Donetsk, Donetsk, and Chasiv Yar in the near future. Next, we move with you to the South Donetsk direction, from where important footage is also coming in. Over the past day, Russian units have managed to expand the control zone south of Novoandriivka and Serebryanka. Objective control footage has been published by the Ukrainian side, showing FPV drone strikes on the forward positions of the Russian army. In these frames, we can see an attempt by Russian forces to land, possibly an attempt at rotation. But something went wrong, and it did not end very successfully. In any case, these frames were taken in this exact location. Also, some neutral cartographers are further adjusting the map. So in general, we can see that at the moment, the Russian army is focused on cutting off this salient. The salient between the settlements of Zaporizhzhia and Andriivka. Russian units are now trying to cut off this pocket in order to straighten the front line, and then, subsequently, with new forces and freed-up resources, move further towards the border with the Dnipropetrovsk region. Next, we move with you to the Zaporizhzhia direction. Over the past day, information has come in about the expansion of the control zone in the area of the village of Lobkove. Several forest belts have come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, but it is still too early to talk about full control over Lobkov. Hostilities continue, but we can see that compared to previous weeks, the pace of the offensive here has also slowed down. It is difficult to say why this is the case. Perhaps tomorrow, after the failed first round of negotiations between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Saudi Arabia, hostilities will resume with greater intensity. And that's all, dear friends. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, give your likes, and all the best to everyone.